The blood came too fast, pooling beneath the struggling woman on the rough cotton sheets, and Clara Dawson knew she had perhaps minutes to save both mother and child if the Lord was willing. She pressed her weathered hands against the woman's swollen belly, closed her eyes, and began to pray aloud as she had done for every birth in Carson City, Nevada, since arriving here in 1868. The words tumbled from her lips in urgent whispers, mingling with the gasps of pain from Clara Thompson, a rancher's wife who had labored for nearly 18 hours in the small bedroom of their homestead just outside town. "Lord above, guide my hands and steady my heart," Clara murmured, feeling for the baby's position through the taut skin. "Let this child breathe your air and know your mercy." Sarah's husband paced outside the door, his boots creating a rhythmic thud against the wooden floorboards that matched the frantic beating of Clara's own heart. She had delivered 43 babies in the 3 years since coming to this dusty Nevada town, and not one had been lost, though there had been close calls that left her trembling and grateful for divine intervention. This was another such moment. Clara worked quickly, her fingers experienced and sure despite the fear that threatened to overwhelm her. At 42 years old, she had been delivering babies since she was barely 20, learning the craft from her own mother back in Missouri before the war changed everything. Her husband had died at Shiloh, leaving her childless and purposeless until she found her calling in bringing new life into a world that seemed bent on taking it away. The baby turned finally, responding to Clara's skilled manipulation, and suddenly there was a rush of fluid and the crown of a tiny head appeared. Clara caught her breath, steadied her shaking hands, and guided the infant into the world with practiced gentleness. The baby boy emerged silent and blue, and for one terrible moment Clara thought her perfect record would be broken. But she prayed. She prayed as she cleared his mouth and nose, as she rubbed his tiny chest with a warm cloth, as she breathed softly into his face and pleaded with God to fill those small lungs with air. And then, like a miracle, the baby gasped, coughed, and began to wail with the indignant fury of the newly born. Sarah wept with relief and exhaustion, reaching for her son with trembling arms. Clara cleaned the infant, wrapped him in a soft blanket her own hands had quilted, and placed him against his mother's chest. Then she dealt with the bleeding, packing and pressing until the flow slowed and stopped, until she was certain Sarah would live to see her son grow. "What will you name him?" Clara asked quietly, washing her hands in the basin by the window. "Quinton," Sarah whispered, her eyes heavy with approaching sleep. "Quinton Thomas Thompson, for my father and my husband's father both." Clara smiled and touched the baby's downy head. "Quinton Thomas Thompson," she repeated, committing the name to memory as she did with all her babies. "May the Lord bless you and keep you all your days." She prayed over him then, as she prayed over every child she delivered, asking for protection and grace, and a life filled with purpose. She did not know then that this particular prayer would bind their lives together in ways she could never have imagined. The years passed quickly in Carson City, marked by the changing seasons and the steady stream of babies that continued to arrive into Clara's capable hands. She delivered merchants' children and miners' babies, the offspring of saloon girls and respectable wives alike. She prayed over every single one, regardless of their parents' station or circumstances, believing that every soul deserved a blessing at the moment of entry into this difficult world. Clara lived alone in a small house on the edge of town, a modest dwelling that had been left to her by an elderly couple whose grandchildren she had successfully delivered during a difficult twin birth. They had no other family, and insisted she take the house as payment, refusing to hear otherwise. It suited her needs perfectly, with a comfortable bedroom, a kitchen with a good stove, and a sitting room where she could receive expectant mothers for examinations. Her life had settled into a peaceful rhythm of work and prayer, of tending her small garden and making her rounds through town to check on new mothers and their infants. She attended church every Sunday at the white clapboard building on Main Street, where Reverend Patterson praised her work and called her an instrument of God's will. Clara did not think herself particularly special, but she was grateful to be useful. She kept detailed records of every birth in a leather journal, noting the date, the parents' names, the circumstances of the delivery, and any complications or notable events. Young Quinton Thompson's entry included the notation "Answered prayer brought breath" and a small star in the margin, marking him as one of the miraculous saves that reinforced her faith. She saw him occasionally over the years, when Sarah brought him into town for supplies, or when Clara made her follow-up visits to check on mother and child. He grew from a squalling infant into a sturdy toddler with his mother's dark eyes and his father's strong jaw. Clara always felt a particular tenderness toward him, remembering how close he had come to slipping away in those first crucial moments. When Quinton was 5 years old, his mother died of pneumonia during a particularly brutal winter. Clara attended the funeral and wept along with the rest of the town, mourning a good woman taken too soon. She worried about the boy, about how he would fare being raised by his father and the ranch hands, without a mother's gentle influence. But John Thompson proved to be a devoted father, and young Quinton thrived despite the loss. Clara would see him in town from time to time, growing taller and broader, learning to ride and rope and handle the responsibilities of ranch life. He was always polite when their paths crossed, tipping his hat and calling her Miss Clara in a voice that grew deeper with each passing year. The town itself was changing too. Carson City had been designated the state capital when Nevada gained statehood in 1864, and by the 1870s, it was a bustling center of commerce and government. The Comstock lode mines continued to produce silver and gold, drawing fortune seekers and businessmen from across the country. The Virginia and Truckee Railroad connected Carson City to Virginia City and Reno, bringing more people and more babies for Clara to deliver. She delivered the governor's daughter in 1872, a straightforward birth that nonetheless brought her some notoriety and a generous payment that she immediately donated to the church's fund for widows and orphans. She had no need for wealth, only enough to maintain her simple lifestyle and purchase the medical supplies necessary for her work. In 1875, Clara delivered twins to a young couple who had traveled west on the promise of mining jobs, only to find themselves penniless and desperate. She not only delivered their daughters safely, but also arranged for the mother to take in laundry and the father to find work at the stable, ensuring the family would have a chance to survive. This was typical of Clara's approach. She saw her role as extending beyond the moment of birth to encompass the well-being of the entire family. It was during the summer of 1880 that she encountered Quinton Thompson again in a way that would change both their lives forever. Clara had been called to a homestead nearly 10 miles outside town, where a young woman was experiencing her first labor. The journey required a wagon, and Clara's own horse had gone lame the week before. She was standing outside the livery, negotiating with the owner for a rental, when a tall figure approached from behind. "Miss Clara." She turned to find Quinton Thompson looking down at her from what seemed an impossible height. He had grown into a man while she was not paying attention, and what a man he had become. At 20 years old, he stood well over 6 feet tall, with broad shoulders and the lean, muscled build of someone who worked hard for a living. His dark eyes were kind despite the sun-weathered lines already forming at their corners, and his smile was genuinely warm. "Quinton Thompson," Clara said, surprised at how much her heart lifted at seeing him. "My goodness, you have grown." "Yes, madam," he said, removing his hat in a gesture of respect. "I could not help overhearing that you are in need of transport. I would be happy to drive you wherever you need to go." Clara hesitated, not wanting to impose, but the livery owner was asking an exorbitant price, and she knew time was of the essence. "There is a woman in labor at the Morrison place," she said. "It is quite a distance, and I do not know how long I will need to stay." "I have nowhere else to be," Quinton assured her. "Let me hitch up my wagon." The ride out to the Morrison homestead took the better part of an hour, and Clara found herself engaged in conversation with the young man who had been the first baby she prayed back to life in Carson City. He spoke of his father's ranch, of the cattle they were raising and the challenges of the dry summer. He mentioned in passing that his father had remarried 2 years prior, a kind woman from Reno who made sure Quinton ate properly and mended his clothes. "I am glad your father found happiness again," Clara said sincerely. "Your mother would have wanted that for him." "I think so too," Quinton agreed. "I do not remember her very well, if I am honest. Just impressions, you know, warmth and songs and the smell of bread baking. Father talks about her sometimes, keeps her memory alive." "She was a brave woman," Clara said. "You very nearly did not make it into this world, you know. Both of you struggled." Quinton glanced at her with interest. "Father mentioned that you saved us both. He says you are the finest midwife in Nevada, possibly in the whole West." Clara felt her cheeks warm at the praise. "I am merely a vessel for God's work. He deserves the credit." "Perhaps," Quinton said, "but your hands did the work and your knowledge made the difference." "That deserves recognition too." They arrived at the Morrison place to find the husband frantic with worry. His wife had been laboring since before dawn, and it was now past noon. Clara quickly assessed the situation and found it to be a breech birth, the baby positioned feet first in the womb. It would be a difficult delivery requiring all her skill and experience. Quinton waited outside with the husband, keeping the man calm while Clara worked. The labor continued for hours, well into the evening, but finally Clara managed to turn the baby and deliver a healthy girl into the world. She prayed over the infant as always, asking for blessings and protection, and then tended to the exhausted mother. It was past midnight when she finally emerged from the bedroom, tired but satisfied with the outcome. Quinton was dozing in a chair but woke immediately when she appeared. The new father had gone in to meet his daughter, leaving Clara and Quinton alone in the small front room. "All is well?" Quinton asked, standing and stretching his long limbs. "All is very well," Clara confirmed. "A healthy girl and a recovering mother. The Lord was merciful." "I never doubted it, not with you doing the delivering," Quinton said. He studied her face in the lamplight and frowned slightly. "You look exhausted. Let me take you home." The ride back to Carson City was quiet, both of them tired from the long day. Clara found herself nodding off against the wagon seat, lulled by the gentle rocking and the sound of hoofbeats on the dirt road. She woke when the wagon stopped, surprised to find herself leaning against Quinton's shoulder. "I apologize," she said, sitting up quickly. "No need," Quinton said gently. "You earned your rest. We are at your house." He helped her down from the wagon, his hands strong and steady at her waist, and insisted on walking her to her door despite her protests that it was unnecessary. At the threshold, he paused and looked down at her with an expression she could not quite read in the darkness. "Thank you for letting me help today," he said. "It meant a great deal to me." "I should be thanking you," Clara replied. "I would have been stuck in town without your assistance." "Perhaps we could make an arrangement," Quinton suggested. You often need transport to distant homesteads, and I am frequently traveling between town and the ranch. I would be happy to serve as your driver when needed. No payment required, he added quickly when he saw her about to protest. Just the satisfaction of helping with your important work. Clara considered the offer. Her lame horse would not recover enough for the hard travel her work required, and hiring transport each time was becoming expensive. More than that, she had enjoyed Quinton's company, found him to be thoughtful and mature beyond his years. That would be acceptable, she said finally, though I insist on at least providing meals and some compensation for your time. Quinton grinned, and Clara was struck by how handsome he had become. The thought made her uncomfortable, and she pushed it away. He was 20 years old, young enough to be her son if she had married and had children young. Such thoughts were inappropriate. We have an agreement then, Quinton said, tipping his hat. Good night, Miss Clara. Sleep well. Over the following months, Quinton Thompson became a regular presence in Clara's life. He appeared whenever she needed transport to outlying homesteads, always cheerful and ready to help regardless of the hour or weather conditions. He carried her medical bag, boiled water when needed, and kept anxious fathers calm while Clara worked her miracles in the birthing rooms. They developed an easy rapport, talking during the long wagon rides about everything and nothing. Clara learned that Quinton loved the ranch life, but also harbored dreams of seeing more of the country, of perhaps traveling to San Francisco, or even back east to the great cities his father had described from his own youth. He read voraciously when time permitted, borrowing books from anyone who would lend them, hungry for knowledge about the wider world. In turn, Clara found herself sharing stories from her own past, tales of her childhood in Missouri and her brief marriage to a man she had loved deeply, but barely had time to know before the war took him. She spoke of learning midwifery from her mother, of the satisfaction she found in bringing new life into the world, and of the loneliness that sometimes crept in during the quiet evenings in her small house. You never considered marrying again? Quinton asked one autumn afternoon as they returned from delivering a rancher's 7th son. Clara was quiet for a moment, watching the golden landscape roll by. I considered it, she admitted. There were a few men over the years who expressed interest. But none of them felt right, and I did not want to marry simply to avoid being alone. My work gives me purpose and fulfillment. That has been enough. Has been, Quinton repeated, picking up on her choice of words. Does that mean it might not be enough anymore? Clara glanced at him, startled by his perceptiveness. I am growing older, she said carefully. The work is physically demanding, and there are days when I feel every one of my years. I suppose I wonder sometimes what will happen when I can no longer do this work, when my hands are too shaky or my back too weak for the long hours. You are hardly ancient, Quinton said with a laugh. You have many good years left. I am 45 years old, Clara said. That is not young. Age is more than just numbers, Quinton replied. You have more energy and spirit than people half your age, and your experience is invaluable. The town needs you. The intensity in his voice made Clara look at him more closely, and she saw something in his expression that made her breath catch. It was admiration, certainly, but also something warmer, something that made her heart beat faster even as her mind rejected the possibility. She was being foolish. Quinton was simply a kind young man who appreciated her work, nothing more. But over the winter months, as they continued their partnership, Clara found it increasingly difficult to dismiss the growing connection between them. Quinton began stopping by her house even when there were no births scheduled, bringing her fresh vegetables from the ranch or a book he thought she might enjoy. He repaired her front steps without being asked, replaced a broken window, and chopped enough firewood to see her through the coldest months. The town began to notice, and talk started to circulate. Widow Morrison mentioned to Clara after church one Sunday that it was nice to see her with such an attentive young friend. The comment was innocent enough, but the knowing look in the older woman's eyes suggested she thought there might be more to the relationship. Clara tried to maintain proper distance, to remind herself that Quinton was 21 years old to her 45, that the gap between them was too great, that people would talk. But her heart refused to listen to reason. She found herself looking forward to their time together, noticing details about him she had no business noticing, like how his eyes crinkled when he smiled, or the way his voice softened when he spoke to her. It was during a difficult birth in February of 1881 that things came to a head between them. Clara had been called to attend a young woman whose baby was not progressing properly through the birth canal. Quinton drove her through a snowstorm to reach the remote cabin, and they arrived to find the situation dire. Clara worked for hours, trying everything she knew to help the baby along. She prayed continuously, begging God for guidance and strength. The mother was weakening, and Clara could hear the baby's heartbeat slowing. Panic threatened to overwhelm her, the fear that she would finally lose a baby after 12 years of perfect success. "You can do this," Quinton said quietly from the doorway, where he had been watching with the father's permission. "I have faith in you, Clara." Something about hearing her name from his lips, spoken with such absolute confidence, steadied her. She took a deep breath, closed her eyes, and felt for the baby one more time. There. A slight shift was all that was needed. She maneuvered carefully, praying all the while, and suddenly the baby slipped free into her waiting hands. The infant girl was small and weak but breathing. Clara cleaned her gently, wrapped her warmly, and placed her on her mother's chest before dealing with the bleeding and afterbirth. When everything was finally finished and both mother and baby were resting comfortably, Clara walked outside into the cold night air and began to shake. Quinton found her sitting on the cabin's front step, her face in her hands, trembling from exhaustion and the release of tension. He sat beside her without a word and pulled her against his side, letting her lean on his strength. "I almost lost them," Clara whispered. "I was so frightened." "But you did not lose them," Quinton said firmly. "You saved them as you have saved so many others. You are remarkable, Clara Dawson, the most remarkable woman I have ever known." Clara looked up at him, and in the moonlight reflecting off the snow, she saw the truth written plainly on his face. He loved her. This young man who had been the first baby she saved in Carson City loved her with an intensity that took her breath away. "Quinton," she began, not knowing what to say. "I know what you are going to say," he interrupted. "That I am too young, that people will talk, that it is inappropriate. But I am a grown man, Clara, not a boy. I know my own heart, and my heart is yours. It has been for longer than I care to admit." "People will more than talk," Clara said, though her resolve was crumbling. "They will be cruel." "The age difference is 24 years, Quinton said. "I know. I have done the mathematics, and I do not care. I have seen how lonely you are, Clara, because I am lonely too. I have tried to be interested in girls my own age, but none of them compare to you. None of them have your strength, your compassion, your courage. You say you wonder what will happen when you can no longer do this work. Let me be the answer. Let me care for you, support you, love you the way you deserve to be loved." "I am old enough to be your mother," Clara protested weakly. "But you are not my mother," Quinton said. "You are the woman I love, the woman I want to build a life with. Please, Clara, give us a chance." She should have said no. The sensible part of her brain was screaming at her to refuse, to protect both of them from scandal and judgment. But the lonely, Yearning part of her heart that she had suppressed for so many years rose up and overwhelmed all her objections. "Yes," she heard herself say. "Yes, Quinton." He kissed her then, gentle and reverent, and Clara felt something inside her that had been frozen for decades finally thaw. When they pulled apart, she was crying, but they were tears of joy rather than sorrow. The courtship that followed was conducted with as much discretion as possible, but in a town the size of Carson City, nothing stayed secret for long. Clara endured the stares and whispers with as much dignity as she could muster, and Quinton faced down more than one confrontation from men who thought he was making a fool of himself. John Thompson, Quinton's father, was surprisingly supportive when his son brought Clara to dinner to meet him and his wife properly. The older man looked at Clara with gratitude in his eyes and thanked her again for saving both Sarah and Quinton all those years ago. "If my son loves you, then you have my blessing," John said simply. "You are a good woman, Miss Clara, and you will make him happy. That is all a father can ask for." Reverend Patterson was less enthusiastic, expressing concern about the age difference and what it might mean for the church's reputation. But when Clara offered to step down from her voluntary work with the Ladies' Auxiliary, the Reverend quickly backtracked, unwilling to lose such a dedicated and effective volunteer. "I suppose love comes in many forms," he said reluctantly. "And you are both adults capable of making your own decisions. I will perform the ceremony if that is what you truly want." They were married in May of 1881, in a small ceremony attended by a handful of close friends and family. Clara wore a simple blue dress rather than white, feeling that white would be inappropriate at her age and given her previous marriage. Quinton looked unbearably handsome in his best suit, his eyes never leaving her face as they exchanged vows. Clara moved into the small house Quinton had built on his father's ranch land, a wedding gift from John Thompson. It was larger than her townhouse, with a bedroom, a kitchen, a sitting room, and a small room that Quinton said could be used for her medical supplies and records. The view from the front porch looked out over rolling hills dotted with cattle, and Clara found unexpected peace in the isolation. She continued her midwifery work, though now Quinton was always available to drive her when needed. They settled into married life with surprising ease, given the unconventional nature of their relationship. Quinton was patient and tender, never making Clara feel old or inadequate despite their age difference. In turn, Clara brought warmth and companionship to his previously solitary life, filling his home with laughter and love. The first real test of their marriage came 6 months after the wedding, when Clara fainted during a difficult delivery. Quinton, who had been waiting outside, rushed in to find her collapsed on the floor, the baby still undelivered. He helped her to a chair, then did something he had never attempted before. Drawing on what he had observed over the many months of accompanying Clara, he delivered the baby himself, following her techniques and praying as he worked. When Clara came to, it was to find Quinton holding a squalling infant and looking absolutely terrified. The mother was fine, the baby was healthy, and Clara's husband had proven himself capable of rising to any challenge. "I cannot believe you did that," Clara said, still dizzy but filled with pride. "I had an excellent teacher," Quinton replied, carefully handing the baby to its mother. "Though I would prefer to leave the actual delivering to you in the future, if possible." Clara agreed to see the doctor in Carson City, something she had been putting off. Dr. Hendricks examined her thoroughly and delivered news that left her reeling. Her fainting spell had been caused not by exhaustion or illness, but by early pregnancy. At 46 years old, after decades of believing herself barren, Clara Dawson Thompson was going to have a baby. "Are you certain?" she asked, unable to believe it. I thought I was too old. I thought I could not have children. It is unusual at your age, Dr. Hendricks admitted, but not impossible. You are healthy and strong. However, I must warn you that the pregnancy will be more difficult than it would be for a younger woman, and there are risks. You must take care of yourself. Clara went home in a daze and found Quinton working with one of the horses in the corral. When she told him the news, he lifted her off her feet and spun her around, laughing with pure joy. His reaction banished any of Clara's fears about how he might receive the information. "We are going to have a baby," he kept repeating as though saying it would make it more real. "Clara, we are going to be parents." "I am terrified," Clara admitted. "I have delivered hundreds of babies, but the thought of delivering my own—" "You will not deliver your own," Quinton said firmly. "We will bring in someone else, another midwife or Dr. Hendricks himself. You will be the patient for once, and you will let others care for you." The pregnancy was indeed difficult. Clara experienced sickness and fatigue far beyond what she had seen in her younger mothers. She was forced to cut back on her midwifery work, taking only the most urgent cases and relying on Quinton more than ever. The town rallied around them, with women bringing food and offering advice. Even those who had been most critical of their marriage seemed to soften, moved by the miracle of a baby coming to a woman who had spent her life bringing babies into the world. Clara prayed constantly, not just for the baby's health, but for the strength to survive the birth herself. She was acutely aware of the risks at her age, had seen too many women die in childbirth to be naive about the dangers. But she also felt a peace she had never experienced before, a sense that this was meant to be, that God had waited until now to give her this gift, because now was when she was ready to receive it. Quinton was attentive to the point of being overbearing, constantly worried about Clara overdoing things or not resting enough. She found his concern both touching and occasionally irritating, but she loved him more deeply with each passing day. He had given her a life she never thought she would have, a love she never expected to find. In March of 1882, Clara went into labor 3 weeks before her due date. Quinton immediately rode to town to fetch Dr. Hendricks and the best midwife in the area besides Clara herself, a capable woman named Ellen Morrison, who had learned her craft from Clara over the years. The labor was long and arduous, lasting nearly 20 hours, and there were moments when Clara feared she would not survive. But she prayed, as she had prayed over every birth she had attended, and she held onto Quinton's hand with all her strength. Ellen worked competently and calmly, and Dr. Hendricks monitored Clara's heartbeat and provided pain relief when needed. And finally, as dawn broke over the Nevada hills, Clara delivered a healthy baby boy. Quinton wept openly as he held his son for the first time, and Clara cried too, overwhelmed by love and gratitude and relief. The baby was perfect, with dark hair and Quinton's strong jaw and Clara's delicate hands. They named him Samuel John Thompson, honoring both Clara's late husband and Quinton's father. The weeks following Samuel's birth were exhausting but joyful. Clara recovered slowly from the difficult delivery, but her happiness gave her strength she did not know she possessed. Quinton proved to be a devoted father, waking with the baby at night so Clara could rest, changing diapers without complaint, and spending hours simply staring at his son in wonder. Clara returned to her midwifery work when Samuel was 3 months old, but with a new understanding of what her mothers experienced. She had always been compassionate, but now she had walked the same terrifying path they walked, had felt the same fears and hopes. It made her an even better midwife, more patient and empathetic than before. Samuel grew into a lively toddler, always getting into mischief and keeping both his parents constantly occupied. Clara delighted in motherhood, even though it had come to her so late in life. Quinton was an involved and loving father, teaching his son to ride and rope while also encouraging gentleness and kindness. When Samuel was 2 years old, Clara discovered she was pregnant again. She was 49 now, and Dr. Hendricks was seriously concerned about the risks. But Clara felt strong and healthy, and she trusted in God's plan for her life. This pregnancy was easier than the first, perhaps because her body had remembered what to do, and in December of 1883, she delivered a daughter they named Sarah Catherine, after Quinton's mother and Clara's middle name. With 2 small children and her midwifery practice, Clara's life was fuller than she ever could have imagined during those lonely years before Quinton came back into her life as a grown man. The age difference that had once seemed so insurmountable now felt irrelevant. They were partners in every sense, supporting each other through challenges and celebrating victories together. The town of Carson City continued to grow and change around them. The mining boom began to slow, but the capital remained a vibrant center of commerce and government. Clara delivered babies for a new generation of settlers, and watched some of her earliest deliveries grow up and have children of their own, bringing their wives to the midwife they had heard about all their lives. Quinton expanded his cattle operation with his father, and the Thompson Ranch became one of the most successful in the area. He never lost his love of reading and learning, and their home filled with books that he read aloud to Clara and the children during quiet evenings. Samuel and Sarah adored their father, following him everywhere when he was home and begging for his attention. As the years passed, Clara began to slow down. Her hands developed arthritis, making the fine motor work of midwifery increasingly difficult. She was in her mid-50s now, and while still capable, she knew her time as an active midwife was coming to an end. The realization saddened her, but she had trained several younger women in her techniques, ensuring that Carson City would continue to have skilled birth attendants long after she retired. It was during the summer of 1886, when Samuel was 4 and Sarah nearly 3, that Clara attended her last birth. The mother was the daughter of one of the first women Clara had attended after arriving in Carson City, 18 years earlier. Clara delivered a healthy boy after a straightforward labor, prayed over him as she had prayed over more than 300 babies during her career, and handed him to his weeping mother. "Thank you," the young woman said. "Thank you for being here for all of this." Clara felt tears in her own eyes as she realized this was the closing of a chapter. "It has been my honor," she said softly. "Every single birth, every baby, every mother, an honor and a blessing." She told Quinton that evening that she was retiring from active midwifery. He held her close and kissed her forehead, understanding without words what the decision cost her. "You have given this town so much," he said. "You have saved countless lives and brought so much joy into the world. It is time to rest now, to let others carry on your work while you enjoy watching our children grow." Clara knew he was right, but it still felt like losing a part of herself. Midwifery had defined her for so long that she was not sure who she was without it. But Quinton helped her find new purpose in other ways. She began writing down everything she had learned over her decades of practice, creating a detailed manual for midwives that could be used to train future generations. She continued to consult with the younger midwives when they encountered difficult cases, offering advice and guidance without physically attending births, and she threw herself into motherhood with renewed energy. Samuel started school in Carson City, riding into town each morning with his father and coming home full of stories about his day. Sarah was a bright, inquisitive child who wanted to know everything about everything. Clara taught her daughter to read at an early age and delighted in her endless questions. The Thompson family became a fixture in Carson City society. Despite the unusual circumstances of Clara and Quinton's marriage, they had won the respect and affection of the town through hard work, kindness, and unwavering devotion to each other and their community. When Reverend Patterson died in 1888, the new minister who replaced him came to Clara for advice and guidance, recognizing her as a pillar of the church and community. John Thompson passed away peacefully in his sleep in 1889, and Quinton inherited the ranch in full. He and Clara moved into the main ranch house, which was larger and more comfortable than their small cottage. They filled it with love and laughter, hosting family dinners and holiday celebrations that became legendary in the area. Clara watched her children grow with the bittersweet awareness that her time with them might be shorter than most mothers enjoyed. She was in her late 50s now, and while still healthy, she felt her age in ways she could not ignore. But rather than dwelling on what might be lost, she chose to savor every moment, every small victory and milestone. Samuel, at 9 years old, announced that he wanted to be a doctor when he grew up, inspired by watching his mother work and hearing her stories. Clara's heart swelled with pride, knowing that her passion for healing would continue through her son. Sarah, at 7, was more interested in horses and cattle than medicine, but she had inherited her mother's compassionate heart and was always the first to comfort anyone in distress. It was during the winter of 1890 that Quinton made a decision that would honor Clara in a way she never expected. They were sitting by the fire one evening, the children already in bed, when he pulled some papers from his desk and set them in front of her. "I have been thinking about this for a long time," he said quietly, "and I have spoken with Samuel and Sarah about it. We all agree." Clara looked at the papers, confused. They appeared to be some sort of legal document, but she could not make sense of the formal language. "What is this?" she asked. "It is a petition to change my name," Quinton said, "and Samuel's and Sarah's names as well. We want to take your maiden name, Clara. We want to be known as Dawson instead of Thompson." Clara stared at him, unable to process what he was saying. "But why?" "Thompson is a good name, your family name. And Dawson is your family name," Quinton said. "A name that has come to represent healing and compassion and service throughout this region. You have no one to carry on your family name, Clara. No brothers, no other children. When you are gone, Dawson dies with you unless we do this." Tears began streaming down Clara's face. "But your father, his legacy." "My father would understand," Quinton said firmly. "He loved you, Clara. He was grateful to you until his dying day, and the Thompson name will not disappear. It is my middle name, Samuel's middle name. It will remain part of who we are, but we want to honor you, to give you this gift. You delivered me into this world and saved my life on my very first day. You have spent your entire adult life saving lives and bringing babies safely into the world. Let me give you my name, Clara. Let me give you this legacy." Clara could not speak through her tears. She simply nodded, and Quinton pulled her into his arms, holding her as she wept with gratitude and love beyond measure. The name change was finalized in the spring of 1891. Quinton Dawson, Samuel Dawson, and Sarah Dawson. Clara Dawson, who had lived a good portion of her life as Clara Dawson, midwife, now found herself Clara Dawson again, but this time surrounded by family who bore her name with pride. The town celebrated the gesture, understanding the profound love and respect it represented. The women Clara had served over the years, the babies she had delivered who were now young adults themselves, all spoke of how fitting it was that the Dawson name would continue through the family of the first baby Clara had saved in Carson City. As Clara entered her 60s, She found peace in her life that she had never imagined possible. She spent her days helping Quinton manage the ranch, teaching Sarah to cook and sew, and working with Samuel as he studied anatomy and physiology from the medical texts Quinton ordered from San Francisco. Her arthritis made fine needlework difficult, but she could still knead bread dough and rock a neighbor's fussy baby when needed. The manual she had written became required reading for midwives throughout Nevada and eventually beyond. Women from other territories wrote to her asking for advice, and Clara corresponded with them faithfully, sharing everything she had learned. Her legacy was spreading far beyond the 347 babies she had personally delivered in Carson City. Quinton remained as devoted to her as ever, even as they both aged and their bodies slowed down. He still looked at her with the same love and admiration he had shown that night in the snow when he first declared his feelings. Clara had never felt more cherished, more valued, more loved than she did as Quinton Dawson's wife. In 1895, when Samuel was 13 and talking seriously about attending medical school back east, a young woman came to the ranch seeking Clara. She was heavily pregnant and terrified, having run away from an abusive situation in Virginia City. Clara took her in without hesitation, giving her a safe place to stay and preparing to deliver her baby when the time came. Though Clara's hands were too arthritic for the actual delivery work now, she coached Ellen Morrison through the birth while Quinton stayed with the frightened girl, holding her hand and speaking calming words. It was a difficult breech birth, and for a moment Clara feared they would lose the baby. But Ellen had learned her lessons well, and with Clara's guidance, she managed to turn the baby and deliver him safely. Clara held the infant boy, so tiny and perfect, and felt the familiar surge of gratitude and wonder she had experienced with every birth. She might not be able to do the physical work anymore, but she could still pray. She prayed over this baby as she had prayed over all the others, asking for blessings and protection and a life filled with purpose. "What will you name him?" Clara asked the exhausted mother. The girl, who could not have been more than 18, looked at Clara with tears in her eyes. "Dawson," she said. "I want to name him Dawson after you because you saved us both." Clara wept then, overwhelmed by the honor. It was not the first baby to be named after her. Over the years, several families had named daughters Clara in her honor. But hearing her family name, the name her husband and children now bore, given to this tiny infant, felt like the closing of a circle that had begun so long ago. The girl stayed with them for several months, recovering from the birth and learning to care for her son. Clara taught her everything she knew about mothering, and Quinton helped her find work and housing in Carson City, where she could make a fresh start. Before she left, she thanked Clara tearfully for showing her what kindness and compassion looked like. "You did not judge me," the girl said. "You just helped. I will never forget that." After she left, Clara sat on the porch with Quinton, watching the sunset paint the Nevada sky in shades of orange and gold. She was 60 years old now, her hair completely white, her body marked by age and the hard work of a lifetime. But she had never felt more content. "I have had a good life," she said to Quinton, taking his hand. "Better than I ever dreamed possible." "It is not over yet," Quinton replied, squeezing her fingers gently. "We have many more years together," and they did. Clara lived to see Samuel graduate from medical school and return to Carson City to practice as a doctor, carrying on her legacy of healing. She watched Sarah marry a kind rancher and start her own family, delivering 3 grandchildren for Clara to spoil and love. She and Quinton celebrated their 20th anniversary in 1901, surrounded by children, grandchildren, and friends who had become family. Clara continued to mentor young midwives well into her 70s, even when she could barely hold a pen to write letters. Her mind remained sharp, her spirit strong, her faith unshakable. She was a legend in Carson City and beyond, the midwife who had prayed over every birth and never lost a baby in over 3 decades of practice. When she died peacefully in her sleep in 1908, at the age of 73, the entire town mourned. Her funeral was attended by hundreds of people whose lives she had touched over the years. The babies she had delivered, now adults with children of their own, came to pay their respects. The mothers she had helped, some now grandmothers themselves, wept at her gravestone. And Quinton, now 48 years old, stood with his children and grandchildren and remembered the woman who had saved his life twice, once when he was born and once when she agreed to love him. He had her buried with her midwifery bag and her journal, the record of every life she had helped bring into the world. On her gravestone, he had carved a simple epitaph that captured the essence of who she was, Clara Dawson, beloved wife, mother, and midwife. She prayed over every birth and lived a life of service. Her legacy continues through all those she touched. Quinton lived for many more years, never remarrying, never loving anyone the way he had loved Clara. He expanded the ranch and saw his grandchildren grow and thrive. He donated generously to medical schools and midwifery training programs, ensuring that Clara's knowledge and techniques would be passed on to future generations. And he told anyone who would listen about the remarkable woman who had delivered him as a baby and later became his wife. The woman who taught him that love knows no boundaries and that service to others is the highest calling. Samuel became one of the most respected doctors in Nevada, known for his compassionate care and his innovative techniques in obstetrics. He credited his mother for inspiring his career and his approach to medicine, and he kept her manual on his desk throughout his life, consulting it regularly even as medicine advanced beyond what Clara could have imagined. Sarah raised 6 children on her ranch, and several of them went into medicine or nursing, continuing the family tradition of healing and service. She taught them all about their grandmother Clara, making sure they understood the legacy they carried in their name. The Dawson name became synonymous with healing and compassion in Carson City. 3 generations of doctors and nurses and midwives bore Clara's name and carried on her work, all tracing their lineage back to the cowboy, who had been so grateful to the midwife who saved his life that he gave her his name and his heart. And in the churches and homes throughout Nevada, mothers still prayed over their newborn babies the way Clara had taught them, asking for blessings and protection and lives filled with purpose. The tradition she started, of recognizing each birth as a sacred moment worthy of prayer and reverence, spread far beyond Carson City, touching countless lives in ways she never could have imagined. It was a legacy built not on wealth or power, but on love and service, and the simple act of caring for others in their most vulnerable moments. It was everything Clara had believed in, everything she had worked for, preserved and honored by the man who loved her enough to give her his name and carry her legacy into the future. The story of the midwife who prayed over every birth, and the cowboy she delivered who grew up and gave her his name, became part of the folklore of Carson City, told and retold through generations. It was a reminder that love comes in unexpected forms, that age is no barrier to genuine connection, and that the greatest legacy anyone can leave is not wealth or fame, but the lives they touched and the love they shared. Quinton Dawson, in his final years, would sit on his porch and watch the Nevada sunset, remembering the woman who had given him life twice over. He thought about how close he had come to never drawing his first breath, how Clara's prayers and skill had pulled him back from the edge of death. He thought about the years they had together, the children they raised, the love they shared despite what others thought impossible. And he knew, with absolute certainty, that giving Clara his name had been the greatest decision of his life. Not because it brought him honor or recognition, but because it ensured that her legacy of compassion and healing would continue long after they were both gone, carried forward by their children and their children's children, a testament to the power of love to transcend all boundaries and create something beautiful and lasting. In the end, it was not about the age difference or the unconventional nature of their relationship. It was about two souls who found each other across the years, who chose love when it would have been easier to choose convention, and who built a life together that blessed everyone it touched. Clara Dawson had spent her life bringing babies into the world, and in return, the universe had given her Quinton, a baby she saved who grew up to give her everything she had been missing. A name to carry forward, a love to sustain her, and a legacy that would endure. The ranch house where they had lived eventually became a historical site, preserved by the state of Nevada as a tribute to Clara Dawson's contributions to medicine and midwifery. Visitors could see her medical bag, her journals, and the manual she had written, all carefully maintained by her descendants. And they could read the love letters Quinton had written to her over the years, eloquent testimonies to a love that defied expectations and changed both their lives forever. The town of Carson City erected a statue in Clara's honor in 1925, 17 years after her death. It showed her holding a baby, her face peaceful and filled with joy, capturing the essence of the woman who had devoted her life to bringing new life into the world. At the base of the statue were the words Quinton had chosen. She prayed over every birth and loved without boundaries. And every year, on the anniversary of Clara's death, the midwives and doctors of Carson City would gather at the statue to honor her memory and recommit themselves to the values she embodied. They would share stories of her kindness, her skill, her unwavering faith, and her belief that every life was precious and worthy of the best care they could provide. The love story of Clara Dawson and Quinton Dawson became more than just local legend. It was written about in medical journals as an example of mentorship and legacy. It was told in churches as a testament to God's perfect timing. It was shared in homes as proof that love can bloom in the most unexpected places and flourish despite any obstacle. Their story reminded people that it is never too late to find love, that age is truly just a number when hearts connect, and that the greatest gift one can give another is not wealth or status, but the gift of one's name, one's legacy, and one's unconditional love and support. Quinton Dawson died in 1925 at the age of 65, surrounded by his children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. His last words were about Clara, about how she had been the light of his life and how grateful he was for every moment they had shared. He was buried beside her in the Carson City Cemetery, their matching gravestones standing side by side for eternity, two lives intertwined in death as they had been in life. Their children ensured that the story was preserved for future generations, writing it down in detail and depositing it with the Nevada Historical Society. They wanted everyone to know about the midwife who prayed over every birth and the cowboy whose life she saved, who grew up to give her his name and his heart in return for the gift of life she had given him. And so the legacy continued, generation after generation of Dawsons carrying on the tradition of healing and service that Clara had begun. They became doctors and nurses, midwives and healers, all of them knowing they walked in the footsteps of a woman who had shown them that the greatest calling in life was to serve others with compassion and skill. and that the greatest gift was to love without reservation or fear. The story had a happy ending, as all the best love stories do. Not because everything was perfect or easy, but because two people found each other across an impossible divide and chose to build a life together despite every reason to walk away. They created a family, a legacy, and a love story that inspired everyone who heard it, proving that sometimes the most profound loves are the ones we never see coming, the ones that arrive when we have given up hope, the ones that transform us completely and leave the world better than they found it. Clara Dawson had come to Carson City as a lonely widow with nothing but her skills and her faith. She left behind a family that bore her name, a town that revered her memory, and a legacy of healing that touched thousands of lives. And all because a cowboy whose life she saved on his very first day in the world grew up and loved her enough to give her the one thing she thought she had lost forever. A family name to carry into the future, and a love to fill her heart until her very last breath.